Hello again, everybody. Welcome to another podcast. We call it the Tom Pippin Show with the star of the show, John Dodds, the Packers historian. But you know what? The handsome man in the middle is the man. We will defer the star role to Gary Ellerson, the former Badger and the former Packer. He is a standout, the catalyst on 105.7 FM, The Fan, the big show from 2 to 6, and also with Leroy Butler on Spectrum Sports, the football show hosted by Dennis Krause. Gary, we are honored to have you. Really, thank you so much.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here, and let's make this enjoyable and talk some good football talk.
Absolutely. Right? I'm sorry we have to start with that. You know, it's in the rearview mirror, I understand, but 26-11, the clunker to the LA Chargers, a loss, 7-2. College Field, guys, Dignity Health Sports Park in Carson, California. That's a mouthful. So much came out of that game, Gary. They got there a day early. Maybe there was curfew, maybe not. I don't know. But did you see an issue of a team that just was not ready to play?
Well, it sure felt like. I think when you go back and look at how it all went down, I mean, you look at a team, you thought you were good with the defense, right? At halftime, you go in, you were down 9-0. You thought you were okay, you were solid, right? You were going to get the football back at halftime. You just think this offense can get on track and score. But they could just never figure out that San Diego's defense. Ingram played well, Bosa played well. And at some point, it felt like to me that the offensive line scheme, that they didn't know where they should be blocking. Now, that could be preparation, surprise maybe that they caught them off guard, but whatever it was a bad game for them, I thought, offensively. Defensively, they've been playing like that pretty much all year, and that they give up a ton of yards, right? And they've been holding people down to field goals. The offense, let's just face it, Aaron Rodgers is going to have to lead this team.
Gary, when they don't get takeaways, though, this defense is not as good. Is there a pattern that may be developing that's concerning? They get gashed for those big plays, the passes of 40 yards or more. Is this a defense that it doesn't seem to be ascending at this point, 9 games in? How concerned are you about this D? Is that something that maybe was an aberration they can overcome this particular game? But there seems to be that pattern, except they've been escaping because of the takeaways.
You know, I was thinking about this morning. Doesn't this defense feels like all the rest of the defenses they've ever had?
That's the problem,
it's either all or nothing. It's like they give up a lot of yards, or they get interceptions, or they get sacks. It just feels like they never have that Baltimore Ravens defense with Ray Lewis or with Warren Sapp or with Tampa Bay. But this defense, I feel like, is a lot like some of the defense they had with Charles Woodson and Clay Matthews and Julius Peppers, where they give up a ton of yards, but they can get turnovers and they can get sacks.
You've got a ton of notes, John, even when you don't have them with you. You've got a lot to say. How about your take on that D?
Well, actually, the first note I had here was actually on the offense, and the offense was the 15 scripted plays. 3 were false starts, 1 delay of game, 2 sacks, an illegal block in the back. Those were the 8 of the first 15 plays. It just seemed that they didn't get in sync. Also, Bulaga was their best offensive lineman during the year. He had that ring finger issue at the end of Kansas City. We talked at the end of the podcast last week that this had a feel of 2011 going down to Kansas City when Romeo Crennel became the new coach, where you can't, when Ken Wisenhunt was changed, you don't have the tendencies anymore on defense. You don't know exactly what they're going to do because there's a new guy trying to make a mark. So all the old film and study tendencies they had went out the window.
And as long as we're into the offense, Gary, and that old line, I believe 8 sacks for Rodgers in the last couple games where he had been kept clean, relatively speaking, all season before then. Again, how concerned are you? Is that something that is developing into a pattern, or will they get back on the mark?
Well, here's what we don't know, and a lot of people are not talking about, but Devontae Adams was in this game, and he had not been there for, about 4 or 5 weeks.
Right.
This offense was humming. Now, all of a sudden, you add Devontae Adams back here, and maybe it's just coincident that they didn't play well offensively with Devontae Adams, but what we saw, at least what I saw from Aaron Rodgers, was a guy that was spreading the football around to 8, 9 different receivers. Now, they ultimately got to 8 to 9 receivers, but that didn't happen until the second half. So I think they've got to figure out how to get Devontae back within the offense and back to running like they used to run with. Because to me, I think it's really about Aaron Jones. They need to make sure that 33 is a focal point of what they're trying to do. And then 17, Devontae Adams, get him involved off of that. And I think this offense will open up. Now, guys like Kumaro, MVS, their numbers may go down. Jimmy Graham numbers may go down because of Devontae Adams, but I still think they can get a healthy dose of all these guys, and that's what's going to make them great offensively.
That's a great point. He maybe had 17, 7 catches, 41 yards, whatever, but he came out of the game healthy. So you would think once he gets his feet under him and his toe, that offense certainly should, and you get the rhythm going with Rodgers, it's got to pay off in the end. But I think that Gary brings up another salient point. Aaron Jones has become a focal point, and they need more of 33.
I don't know what happened where he got out of the game plan. I think LaFleur mentioned something after the game that they did get out of the game plan. It seemed like they were throwing it around to the wide receivers. But I asked Gary, going back to that 2011 game with Cromell, he played 2 deep zone on the Packers and shut them down deep. It was something different that everyone in that 2011 season after that copied. It seemed like this match, the front 4 of San Diego provided pass rush and allowed San Diego to drop 7 in zone. Mm-hmm. And it seemed like they dropped 2 or 3 people deep, told the Packers, we challenged you to throw deep, and they couldn't. Did you see something like that?
Well, I mean, and they did. And I think what we saw, though, that the Packers had a quick strike passing game. I mean, if you go back to the game before, the MVS caught maybe like a 5-yard pass and went like 75 yards. Ball's out of his hand. You saw Vitality fullback in the flat, boom, getting rid of the football. I just didn't see any of those types of things that was going on. It felt like to me that Rodgers was looking more downfield than just getting rid of the football. The screen pass that Jones ran for a touchdown against Kansas City, those types of things to me were missing. Now, it could be that they were out of sync, and they just couldn't find their way. And I think you have those games. And this is, listen, you've got a new head coach, right? A new offensive system. Everybody's trying to learn what to do. And I think this, to me, is a learning curve for the Green Bay Packers on how to get better on their way to try and get to the Super Bowl.
I think you bring up something that needs to be repeated. In essence, you're saying the rhythm wasn't there. I mean, Jamal Williams had 2 carries. I mean, one of them, he seemed like the only one who was ready to play. Speaking of ready to play, we have a wonderful sponsor with us, and we're delighted to tell you about Professional Construction, Inc. Mike and Michelle Grau, the company in Waukesha, celebrating their 15th year. They've done it the right way. They've worked their way from the top. They have a family and a family working team as well. They're just fantastic. They do a great deal in the community. As time goes on, we'll tell you much more. And we are very proud again to have Professional Construction, Inc., the 15th year anniversary celebration, PCI in Waukesha. So, John, Matt LaFleur that time, I mean, he was out-coached as well, wasn't he? This was just, he admitted it. It was just one of those bad days from the coaching staff on down. He didn't seem to be able to make the adjustments, as Gary said earlier.
Sometimes the game seems to get away from you, and it seemed like that first opening drive, 8 minutes, and pretty soon you're under the gun where maybe you have to catch up. Maybe you panic a little bit, you don't run those. But then again, those 15 scripted plays I mentioned again, if you put a penalty on each one of those 15 scripted plays, you're supposed to get down in distance 3rd and 1, 3rd and 2. It ended up to be 3rd and 8, 3rd and 14 because of the penalties. It seemed like they couldn't get down, and they were unforced penalties before the snap, a lot of them, with the offensive line. It could be as simple as Tom Silverstein made a comment last week after the Kansas City game that the team looked very tired shaking hands with Kansas City and very tired in the locker room. And we mentioned that last week again, and LaFleur, I think, didn't have a padded practice on Monday or Tuesday because of that. So I'm wondering if that could have happened. If looking back, if the bye week had been last Sunday, that might have been the best possible thing. Instead, they got a clunker where they had the plane trip, they had the distraction of the warm weather. And John Kuhn, the last interesting thing I thought is Kuhn made a comment during the game while it was being broadcast on radio that it was extremely hot on that side of the field. So they were sitting over there, and he said he went on It was about a 15-degree difference on each of the sides, and of course you're always on the east end of the field if you're the visitor, so the sun is shining on you longer. A lot of excuses, but I think they're just trying to. They're just tired, and it was probably a clunker.
Yeah,
Well,
one to throw away.
Yeah, but I would speak to that. I think, though, and I'm going to age myself, back when Tampa Bay was in our division, listen, we fly down there a day or two early, and we stay like at Dodger Town, and then we bus down to Tampa. And we go in December, and it's probably like 80 degrees down in Tampa. That was a big thing for our body to adjust to. Likewise, as Tampa is coming to Green Bay back in the day in December, they didn't want to be here in December, right? Because it's 80 down there. So, yeah, it does take a little bit out of you. And you're just flying from here to the West Coast, it messes up your body clock a little bit.
I love this topic because you've been there and done that, right? We kind of talk about it. You lived it. You played it. You go out, you're in a new atmosphere. The weather is great. You've got an extra day. Maybe you go out. Are some players able to go out and still perform at peak, and there are some who need to watch what they eat, get to sleep at a certain time? Did you notice that, whether it be in your son? I'm not saying you went out partying, but you know what I'm saying.
Well, I mean, if it's sunny out, you want to enjoy the sun. Let's just put it that
At the very least,
yeah.
right? Yeah.
I think because they got in late Friday night almost, I believe, and so they got in pretty late. But they had a late game on Sunday, right? And so I think they had all day Saturday to try to get acclimated to what they were trying to do. And we have curfew, so there's no really going out. I mean, maybe you hang out the mall a little bit more than what you probably should. Maybe those types of things.
The Max McGee days are over.
Yeah, so those things don't happen anymore.
Too many pictures.
Well, Max McGee and Paul Horn, they ruin it for everybody else. I mean, that stuff doesn't happen anymore. But right. So we have curfews. I don't know, their curfew's probably got to be about 9 or 10 o'clock. So they're in. They come around, they check us. But I would say this, if anything was going to happen, it would happen on really that Saturday. But I'm sure they had a walkthrough or a practice on Saturday. So it's not much that they can do. Now, maybe they enjoyed themselves a little bit more during the afternoon time.
A good friend of mine grew up in Hawaii, and he attended the Chaminade win over number 1 Virginia.
I remember that.
Ralph Sampson.
Ralph
Yes.
Sampson.
Company,
Yes.
He said that Jeff Lamp was a sunburn, the power forward on that team, and they came out and they just wanted to go home. The number 1 team in the country was so sunburned that was why Division II beat the number 1 team.
Really?
So there's something to be said for it. You got to take care of yourself on the road, but again, you're 22, 23 years old, and you're out of Green Bay for the first time. And Green Bay is more of the college town where you have more control over the coaches have more control.
Yeah.
Hey, you're out of the control for a bit.
4 pre-snap penalties. You referenced it in the first 3 possessions, and the only 3 they hadn't had. No excuse. 60% of the crowd pulling for the green and gold. But having said that, we're going to have another podcast. We'll talk more about Carolina and the challenges that they pose even without Cam Newton. Gary, do you look at this? I realize that there's no such thing as a good loss. You're a competitor, you want them all. But could this be a wake-up call that you would hope that they would bounce back at Lambeau Field Sunday afternoon and get that 8th W going into the bye with the 49ers looming after that?
And Pip, you're right. I mean, no one in that locker room going to say that was a good loss. But I think that it is. I think when you look at the Green Bay Packers and all the factors that they have involved, new head coach, new offensive system, basically your whole defense is really new. I mean, you've got 2 guys that weren't even on the team last year that are leading your team in sacks. You bring in Amos. He's now your guy that you have down in the back end as your safety. Yes, I think along the way that this team is still learning. Listen, I didn't foresee, I don't know about you guys, I didn't foresee a 13-win season. I thought this Packer team at best could be 9-7 or 8-8, just thinking about all the things that they had to go through, and for LaFleur to get his offense, acclimated to all these guys that they have right now. So to me, 7-2, blessing in disguise, and I think they can rectify what they did wrong to get better here.
John, you look at a team that probably is lacking in depth, and I wonder how much of a factor that's going to be going forward.
It's huge. We've said that number 1, A-Rod, number 2, Bakhtiari, number 3, Bulaga, and it seemed like number 4, Kevin King
And King re-aggravated his hamstring injury,
He
Balaga
did.
with a finger. And John, you've said that before. I'd love to
Yep.
get Gary's comment after you
Yep.
finish off as to how
Sure.
important that could be going forward.
When those 4 players were on the field last year, they beat the Bears in week 1. They played a tie to Minnesota. They played New England and the Rams straight up. They were just as good as any team in the NFC. They've added some things. So I was a little bit more optimistic than you were. I thought I think they're 12-4 with those 4 guys playing, because when King plays, it allows Alexander to go off in freedom to do whatever. When King is out, Alexander then has to guard the best player instead of being more of a playmaker. At least that's what my view is when I'm watching him.
Well, I mean, it does. I think King, in the back end, really helps him out a lot, and really gives him a big corner that they haven't had in a long time. So you look at all these big receivers; they can go and match up too, if need be. Right, Balaga and Bakhtiari, the 2 bookend tackles, yes, they're very important because they don't have anybody behind them, and so they're trying to create some depth on the offensive line, which they hadn't had in a long time. Listen, this team has to stay healthy, and that's really been the problem under Mike McCarthy, is that this team was like leading the league in injuries for the last 4 or 5 years. They're always hurt. And you look at Kevin King, he's always got something wrong with him, but when he's able to play, I mean, he's a difference maker. I think he's a Pro Bowl type player if he can stay on the field.
Yeah, John's been saying that forever and a day. All right, well, we'll take a timeout. We'll get into another podcast looking ahead to Sunday's matchup with Carolina. The Tom Pippin Show with John Dodds, and now the star of the show, Gary Ellerson, the former Badger, the former Packer. Spectrum Sports with Dennis Krause and Leroy Butler on the football show. 105.7 FM, The Fan, the big show. He is the catalyst, the big guy there from 2 to 6. And also, thank you so much to our sponsor, Professional Construction, Inc., out of Waukesha, Mike and Michelle Grau. They're so involved in the community with Down syndrome at the high school level with the Milwaukee Way. We'll embellish that in future shows. For now, Tom Pippins for JD and Gary. Thanks for tuning in, everybody.